I thought we'd do is we'd start with a few kind of lightning round of question answer, of pre-proposed questions for us, and then open it up for more discussion. The great thing about the group here is that we've got some veterans that have been dealing with Bitcoin. So with that, I'll start. I'm Brewster Kale, founder of the Internet Archive, here as the chairman of the Internet Credit Union, which we founded and got chartered about a year ago. And we started in with the Bitcoin world because of the closing of bank accounts of Bitcoin companies, and we tried working with a couple of Bitcoin companies, and the federal response was swift and decisive. I'll talk about it more.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. My name is Paige Freeman. I'm the Vice President of Sales for BitPay. We are the largest payment processor for Bitcoin, and so what we do is we make it very easy for companies to accept Bitcoin as a form of payment, and we can convert back to local currency. So when I'm calling on companies, a lot of times people are hesitant to talk with us at first because they think that they have to hold on to Bitcoin, and they believe the volatility is just too risky and that they'd just rather not even deal with it because they have many other things that they're focused on. But what's been successful for us is that we've been around for 2.5 years, and like I said, it's one of those things where the forward-thinking companies are seeing the advantages. They're seeing that they don't have to pay the high credit card fees, and they can now accept an irreversible payment from anyone on the planet. So it's been a great time, and we'll get into more discussion here. But BitPay, like I said, can help you accept Bitcoin.
I'm Steve Kirsch. I'm the CEO of OneID. I'm here in 3 capacities. The first is we're a vendor of authentication, authorization, secure federated consumer provisioned identity. And so we're a technology you could use to secure your Bitcoin in an exchange. I'm here also on a personal basis because I'm a holder of thousands of Bitcoins. And so I know the problem of trying to keep those Bitcoins and so that nobody can steal them. And so I've read the horror stories of people who have $5 million in Bitcoin and wake up the next morning and find them all gone. So I've spent a lot of time figuring out, well, how do you actually secure your Bitcoin so people can't steal them? And thirdly, I'm here as an investor. So I'm invested in a startup Bitcoin company that solves a lot of the problems that I personally encountered as a user of Bitcoin. So the speed of transaction, getting your money out, securing your Bitcoin, getting instant confirmations of your Bitcoin, being able to purchase them instantly without having to wait a week before you can use them, like on Coinbase and so forth.
Jared Kenna, founder CEO of TradeHill. I got involved in Bitcoin pretty close to the beginning in 2009, and back when Mt. Gox was the only exchange, I thought that we needed some competition. We have a distributed currency. It doesn't make sense to only have one central clearinghouse where it's a single point of failure. Didn't really have much of value then, but started building it to kind of help out the network and hope it would grow. And things have gone pretty well since then. We're a exchange for institutional investors who do large block trades.
David Kinitsky. I'm a senior director at Second Market and general manager at Alternative Currency Asset Management. We create investment solutions for professional investors and institutional investors looking to get exposure to Bitcoin in a more traditional sense. Basically, we bridge the gap between emerging asset classes and early entrepreneurs and the more professional investor side of things. And so we've launched the Bitcoin Investment Trust, and we're also, as part of Second Market Inc., trading and actively buying and selling Bitcoin.
Excellent. And you guys have all been sort of around and dealing with people that are thinking and breathing Bitcoin or coming to it with their dreams. And new technologies sometimes have ups and downs, whether the technology is going to survive, might be, Bitcoin might be still an experiment, whatever. But the dreams that people are coming and trying to see problems they see in the real world or outside, and they're coming to Bitcoin to try to see if it can help solve them. That often endures. That there's the dreamers actually have the enduring vision as to what they want the technology to be, even if this one may leave us short. If you wouldn't mind, go through in the same quick session of what are you seeing people want out of this technology? What are the desires?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is looking at it from a speculator perspective. People that have been involved with Bitcoin see the price going up drastically. So you can look at it that way. You know that as more and more people all over the world see and recognize that Bitcoin is a way of accepting a payment from someone, they're going to take it more seriously, I think. I mean, the price is going to go up drastically, so that's one way of looking at it. The other side, I think, that from my perspective, because I'm calling on companies and asking them to accept Bitcoin, is that they do get to, they don't have to deal with the credit card fees like they have had to deal with for many years, and they can cut back on the payment fraud, because when you accept a payment via Bitcoin, you can now have it converted back into your local currency. So that's one way of looking at, or you can receive the local currency and you don't have to worry about it being charged back. So from my perspective, the main thing I think is that people get into it because they want to make money. The other way is to also cut back on cost.
So I think there are there are a number of different things that people have. They all appeal to different people. Will have different weights on what is important to them. I know the irrevocability is really important. If you're a small vendor, for example, you're shipping something. I know a friend who got an order for $10,000. He checked them out. He asked for the passport. He was about to ship the order, and the legitimate card holder called and said, "Hey, this wasn't my card." And he would have lost 10 grand. But if he had said, "Hey, any order over $1,000 it has to come through Bitcoin," then he could have accepted that order and not have to worry about a chargeback. So that sort of thing is a really, really important thing. That irrevocability can be really important for small merchants. Speculation. I know a lot of people, including myself, look at Bitcoin and say, "Hey, a year ago it was 100 times what it is right now, or 1/100th of what it is now. And gee, how many investments can you do that you make 100 times on your money?" And so that's what kind of got my attention was when I invested in Bitcoin. 3 weeks later, I saw it tripled in value. I said, let's pour a few $1 million into this and see what happens there. And had not been disappointed. Got 3 times my money into just a few weeks on the $1 million investment. So speculation, I think, is got to be considered a factor, and I think it'll probably go up 10 to 100 times from what it is now for sure. I think there's a control aspect of Bitcoin that you don't have, and there's a safety aspect, right? Because if you put your money into FDI insured bank, right, you get $250,000 worth of protection, and above that, it's all up to you. But in Bitcoin, you're basically protected in the full amount, right? So I could have $1 million, and I don't have to worry about that. I wake up the next day and it's out of business. I mean, I had money in Lynn Waldock. I had millions of dollars in Lynn Waldock, and the next day I woke up and found out that it was gone. And so having something that you can store your value that's not going to disappear the next day, and that remains in your control is really cool. And then a third thing or fourth thing or fifth thing that people don't realize is that Bitcoin's kind of like a write-only thing. So if let's say I'm a 7-Eleven store and I take cash, well, somebody could rob me. But if I took Bitcoin, it's actually transferred, and it's transferred in sort of a write-only way, in that I can accept money in at the 7-Eleven store, but somebody can't walk into the store and take money out. And so it's got a nice asymmetry that way that can protect convenience stores. That instead of taking cash, this is a much nicer way of taking cash. So I mean, there are some things that people don't even consider that Bitcoin has that are really cool attributes.
It's probably going to come as a surprise, but I don't really like the speculation that much, which is where I've made my money and where the business does. What really interests me is the digital payments. I lived in Chile for 3 years. I've traveled to Colombia quite a bit, and most of the world doesn't accept anything other than cash. It's just the costs are just too prohibitive. When I was in Chile, I wanted to accept Visa for a business that I had. I had to wait 6 months to get a reader. I had to go through this application process. I had to put a $2,000 deposit down to accept cards. And then I had to pay something like 7 or 8% processing fee. And then they pass that on to the consumers. With Bitcoin, I can download an app. I can put it on an $80 smartphone, which most of the world can get, and then start taking it immediately at almost no fees, probably through BitPay. It's the easiest way to do it. I think it's amazing that the entire world could be taking digital payments, by the end of next year if they get behind it. Also, the speed that everything moves. Anytime you increase the velocity of the money's moving, it's just the GDP and everything else is just going to go through the roof. We wait days to settle wires internationally. It's an utter mess. We can do it in 10 minutes with Bitcoin, irrespective of the country. So.
The Bitcoin Investment Trust, we've got 3 core audiences that are currently investing into the trust. One is tech entrepreneurs who are investing into a new technology, just like venture capitalists always have done. The second is principals at Wall Street firms. So not the Wall Street firms themselves, but the senior executives and other principals there that are kind of on that speculative side of things. And then finally, family offices, multifamily offices, and ultra high net worth individuals who are taking the small little portion of their massive sums of wealth that are in these risky buckets and putting a little bit into Bitcoin, just with the expectation that as it grows, they need to be exposed to this.
And from the Internet Archive, we got involved with this in 2011 when people started writing us saying they wanted to donate to our nonprofit in Bitcoin. And it was a little bit of sort of, I'd heard of it, but not really. So I gave it a test. I gave it to our administrative director and said, you don't get any programmer time. If you can figure out how to take Bitcoins, we win. And she did. And downloaded Bitcoin-QT and put up the little address on the FAQ. And we got, I don't know, a couple $1,000s worth of Bitcoins that year and about $7,000 the next year. And it just started being fun, I guess would be kind of it. It's interesting. I then sat down, read the papers, and it's just, the technology is really beautiful. It's some of the first use of encryption that I've seen that isn't like securing your Visa card number going across. We didn't win the crypto wars for that. So it seemed very much by and for from the internet community. It's the local currency of the internet was one of the things that really drove adoption within the Internet Archive. And we started paying our people optionally in Bitcoin. We got the sushi place going. We had an honor-based ATM. And we're just sort of diving in that sort of, hey, isn't this kind of a fun thing to do? I'm along the lines of trade that I'd like to see it more as a transaction system rather than a speculative system. So if there's a hope of where we are, Bitcoin cost in a year or two, it would be actually at $1,000 and just stabilize, just so we can know and use it. But that would be just my hope of sort of where I'm seeing some people trying to come at the internet. Okay, last round, and then we'll go for questions. Fed response. So during this year, there's been increasing press attention and federal attention, government regulator attention to the Bitcoin phenomenon. If you wouldn't mind saying a little bit about what you've seen happen and if there's any trajectory, any change that you've seen sort of as the year has gone on, and it really, I think, probably it's been mostly a year that most of the attention has come in. What are you seeing in terms of regulators, feds? How's it going?
Well, BitPay was actually at one of the Senate hearings recently, and I think that from our perspective, well, maybe I shouldn't speak for my company, but basically, it was a much more positive response, I think, that, a lot of people within the Bitcoin community were happy about. There's a split, though. Half of us want it regulated and the other half doesn't, because it kind of goes against the whole idea of Bitcoin to have it regulated. And plus, it's peer-to-peer, so how are you going to be able to they're asking for opinions of what we think they should do, and it's, I don't know what to tell them. It's one of those things where it's just the beginning, and like I said, as more and more people like Richard Branson come out and say that he believes in Bitcoin or he can see the future of Bitcoin, more and more people are going to, adopt it and use it. And so I think from a regulation standpoint, I don't know where it's going to go, but initially, like I said, I think it's been very positive to date.
Yeah, I'd say that from my perspective, both having a friend in the Secret Service who testified in one of the Senate hearings and talking with him, as well as listening to the hearings themselves, as well as talking privately to some of America's largest banks, that the trend is definitely up. It's either neutral to up. I mean, I've talked to some banks who are sort of a wait and see, but one very, very large bank that we see their places everywhere. They've gone from a position of management said, hey, don't do anything, to, okay, we're entertaining proposals. And so that is a big, big, major shift that's happened in the last few weeks that most people are not aware of. And that's because at the Senate hearings, they basically didn't come out and trash Bitcoin. And the reason is true, which they presented at the hearing, is that the people who want to launder money, there are much, much better ways to launder money than to use Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has a public ledger, And so if you're going to launder money, you're going to probably use something other than Bitcoin. So they're not looking at regulating Bitcoin because they think that it's a money laundering vehicle. And so they said, hey, basically the point is be careful about how you regulate it. There's probably going to be some regulation to comply with BSA and other regulations, but beyond that, I think the trends are up.
It's probably going to sound really counterintuitive, but I think that the lack of regulation that we have right now on Bitcoin is actually doing more harm than any regulation could. When there's no real clear regulation on it, the banks immediately just don't want to touch it. So banks are absolutely terrified by the lack of regulation. The only thing that we have is FinTech came out on March 18th, 2013, and they said that it's money transmission. Problem is money transmission is regulated by the states, and you're looking at 48 states regulated, I believe, at this time. South Carolina and New Mexico are the only ones that don't, but I have to look that up. But they all have different laws. They all have different procedures you have to go through. Some of them have different amounts that you have to have in bonds, and it's just ridiculous. It could take you a year if you're lucky to get California. Then on top of that, the states aren't 100% sure if they think you need it, and if they don't think you need it, they won't give it to you. So you're in this position where you're trying to comply with a law that hasn't really been fit yet. And the banks say, well, we don't know what you have to comply with, but you're not complying with it, so the banks don't want to bank it. So I think as soon as the government really says, this is how it's going to be regulated, and actually completely figures the entire thing out, it'll grow a lot more, and banks will start to actually embrace it at that point.
Yeah, and I concur with Jared on that. And it's also if you create an app for the App Store. The Apple App Store specifically, right? You can be rejected because they'll say, oh, you don't comply with you're not legally compliant. Well, who's to define what legally compliant is? And in fact, I mean, we're talking with some of the top compliance people in the world, and we ask them, and they say, gray area. Well, we like California, for example. Well, we have to talk to California. And by the way, when we do that and ask that question, they may say we don't know.
Or they just won't answer you. I wrote him a letter 2 years ago, still waiting. Wrote him another one 6 months ago, waiting on that one too.
So Second Market is a FINRA registered broker-dealer and is also an SEC registered alternative trading system. So we are always in constant communication with, from the security side of things, the federal agencies there. And we've been kind of positively surprised that, just like the Senate hearings, it was more information gathering, learning about it, not trying to be too heavy-handed with it. Furthermore, the Bitcoin Investment Trust is audited by Ernst & Young, structured by Sidley Austin. And so with Ernst & Young, we're working through that kind of uncertainty on the tax side of things, and that's another big issue that we're facing. But one thing that we found is that every law firm, every tax group, every big bank, every major financial institution has a team internally that is tasked with figuring their Bitcoin strategy or virtual currency strategy out. And we were very positively surprised that was the case.
And a story from my point of view, when we started the Internet Credit Union, we said, well, we're the Internet Credit Union. So we started taking people's applications and trying to figure out what does that exactly mean. You get this really cool card that says Internet Credit Union with a little Visa stamp on it. It seemed all very official. And then the bank accounts of some of the Bitcoin companies started to be shut down in, I think, February or March. And right around the time of the Bitcoin conference down in San Jose. So I used the podium there with the head of the credit union to go and say, should we work with the Bitcoin companies? And our dance card was full. So we picked two really, really conservative Bitcoin companies to work with. One was Bitfloor, which had their bank accounts canceled by JP Morgan. Or Chase, excuse me. They just basically said, your bank account's canceled. Here's the $2 million that you had in your account. Have a nice day. And this completely screwed this very nice guy he just wanted to go out of business and pay back the money to his customers, and he had a hard time doing this. No bank would then take his $2 million check. So he said, okay, why don't we work with the regulators? And we worked every step of the way where we took his $2 million check, we put it in a bank account, and did, draconian things to go and check who is it going out to, on and on and on. And, So anyway, we did that and was working that one through. We worked with another investment group that actually really knew their customer. The whole thing, it was traded as if it were cash. It was highly regulated, always with the regulators involved. It was fine. Then we got an audit from those guys, and they said, "Oh, you passed muster. Everything's great." But the little note at the end: don't be surprised if you get a letter to not deal with those Bitcoin-y people. Love that. That was a quote. Bitcoin-y people. So, wow, what does that mean? So, open up the opportunity. Hey, we happen to know a bunch about this. You're dealing with the Internet Credit Union. Can we have that? That was not what they wanted to hear. So they basically got an intermediary to, because that could operate fast enough for them to try to shut us down. And it was decisive and non-equivocal of what they wanted to have happen, and they were willing to break their own internal rules to try to do it. So it was Twitch response, but this is now, I think, in July or August, and so I think what's going on now is actually there's a bit of a trajectory where there's not necessarily people just going, Bitcoin, stop it. But getting these conversations going again, at least in the outreaches of the credit union regulator environment, is still slow in coming along. So I think we'll be able to. We're here for another day, and we're working along. But it is there are big forces right now that are going on inside the United States government. At least there were 4 or 5 months ago, to just slam things shut and give themselves some time. So I'm hoping that things get a bit better. So with that, let's open up for questions. Sure. Peter.
So, first question, you mentioned that Bitcoin is one way. You can't undo it, no chargebacks. So who does the escrow when, let's say, the vendor is fraudulent?
So who does the escrow? If I ship something and I pay, or I buy something, I pay for it, and then what I get isn't what was promised, they already have my money. What's the replacement for the chargeback to protect the buyer?
Yeah, so the answer to that is buyer beware. I mean, when you send a Bitcoin payment, it is irreversible, and you're dealing with the honesty of the vendor to return your money. But it's like giving someone cash.
Yeah, but that's not pragmatic. So is that what BitPay, and are people providing escrow services?
One thing that I would look at is Bitcoin's a platform that things can be built on, and what you're talking about is a great business opportunity for a company.
Right.
And there's somebody that's going to build reversibility into it. They'll do it, or BitPay may even do it in the future. They'll accept a Bitcoin and then they will act as the escrow. So, I mean, we're seeing things come up. A few years ago, BitPay's been around a while, almost 3 years.
Yes.
But for 3 years ago, there wasn't a payment processor. You had to only take Bitcoins. Now you send it to them, they turn it into dollars and ACH it to you. So, I mean, you're talking about a great opportunity that I'm sure somebody will fill in the next couple of years.
The underlying technology is basically an irreversible technology, but that's not to say that you can't build things on top of that. And through scripting and all sorts of things, you can do all sorts of clever things with the technology. But the core technology is irreversible. That doesn't mean you can't build something.
Right, but it's like cash or wires. I would not send a wire transfer to buy 1,000 iPods from Nigeria. And that's the reason they ask for wires. And Western Union and things. So it's the same thing. I wouldn't use Bitcoin for anything that I was worried about. Getting completely robbed. If Amazon wants my Bitcoins, I trust them. I would definitely use it.
Right, and exactly. The way I look at it is if Best Buy accepted Bitcoin and we converted back to dollars for them, it's just like going in and paying cash for a television or whatever, and you'll get your receipt. So if you trust that company, they're going to look at it as a reversal of that, whether it's paid via credit card or cash or PayPal. And so, like they were saying, there will be other companies that are going to make it easier on the consumer side. On the merchant side, there's no reason that you shouldn't accept Bitcoin as a form of payment. But you're right, there will be other companies that can come in and take care of the consumers.
My question is about security. I guess kind of two parts. So I know the Bitcoin Investment Trust practices security by obscurity, so you can't talk too much in depth about that. But I'm curious what approach you take to design the security protocols around the Bitcoin Investment Trust, and then broader question for the panel. What kind of security innovations do you see coming down the line? Are there any folks who are currently practicing, like using multi-signature transactions to protect Bitcoins, and what else?
Yeah, so similar to the last round of answers, people are building stuff like this on top of the infrastructure all the time that are going to help solve these problems a little more consumer friendly and just so we can outsource it. But at this point in time, we felt most comfortable as a regulated entity having Ernst & Young audit it, and as a result have to touch some of the operational stuff and basically audit parts of the operational stuff to do it ourselves. And we don't speak publicly about how we do it, but it's pretty standard what the kind of cutting edge cold storage processes are, and then we add the kind of financial operations principal stuff that we have to do as a broker dealer on top of that. So that's about what I'll give.
Right. There's definitely some standard things like storing most of it offline. That way if your website's hacked, you only lose, a percentage of it. And then, we developed a multi-signature process to move it from the cold storage to the hot wallet. That way, if the hot wallet's depleted because people have been making a lot of withdrawals, you go in the system, you need multiple people to do that so that if one person is corrupted or compromised, they can't run off with the entire cold storage. And there's things you could do like giving keys to lawyers, possibly the government, make it easy to confiscate all your Bitcoin when they want to, which is it kind of goes back to that thing about the original Bitcoiners versus the new. These people, like I'm up here talking about how great regulation is for it, and there's people that would kill me for that. They despise me because I got in at the beginning, but. Yeah, so he's going to have a very long answer about security, so I'm going to let him do that.
So I'm from the security side, so I think that all of the existing mechanisms for securing your Bitcoin, including the 2 out of 3 signatures and so forth, are problematic. I think that if you have any amount of Bitcoin in any of the exchanges today, you're a fool, because all you have to do is load malware onto the PC that you use. And it doesn't matter whether you're using Authy or Google Authenticator or whatever your two-factor system is. These things are all in-band security that people are using. And so they're all vulnerable to any kind of malware attack on the computer that can steal all your Bitcoin. So for right now, you should panic if you're keeping any money in an exchange. The safest way, I keep most of my Bitcoin in what's called Bitcoin Armory, and I keep it on offline, and it's very inconvenient. And I have a whole policy for, if California disappears, I can still access my Bitcoin without having to have safety deposit boxes in multiple states, like the Winklevoss twins do. And so I devised this elaborate scheme, that took a page long to document it, and then I ran it by my security expert. My security expert's the guy who came up with Hashcash, which is one of the protocols used in Bitcoin as proof of work. And I showed it to him. He said, "Oh, that's really complicated. I'm not even sure he understood it." So it's very, very difficult for people today to do that. But I'm involved in a company that's developing something that makes it super user-friendly to have much higher security than you could with any of the technologies that are being used today. You'll have to wait for that because I can't reveal how they're doing it. But yes, there's a much better way to keep your stuff in your control. So that, for example, you stored in Coinbase. I stored some Bitcoin in Coinbase, and I couldn't get it out. I couldn't actually pay a vendor. They said, and it was 2 hours later that I could get my Bitcoin out because it's under control of Coinbase when you put it in Coinbase. And so that is a real problem. Your Bitcoin should always be under your control, and there are ways to keep it under your control. And even if you lose your private keys, you can still get it back. And that magic will come out next year.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Keeping it in an exchange, and even, I have an exchange, and I think ours is probably the best exchange to keep it in. But I would still suggest that you keep it, control it yourself. Regarding in-band, when I have a client that wants to pull $1 million out, I'll call their cell phone and say, "Hey, did you really want to move that $1 million of Bitcoin out?" And actually talk to them. Now, I can do that because we have a lot fewer clients, and we only deal in larger amounts, so it makes sense. Somebody like Coinbase, which is probably over 600,000 clients or something like that now, definitely cannot do that every time somebody pulls.
And BitPay is, like I said, a payment processor, so we're not holding on to Bitcoin. We're just merely passing it through. But definitely, I agree that it is a risky thing when you have money out there on the exchanges, because if without the regulation, going back to your point about the consumer protection, it's lacking. And so as more companies get involved, of course, we're gonna fix that problem.
And the exchange may not go out of business, by the way. The exchange could just be shut down by the government, or the funds are confiscated and so forth. So, and some of these like BTCE, people don't even know who's behind that. And if you send your money to Bitstamp, you're sending your money to Slovenia. And
they're great guys, though.
Yeah, they are great guys. And I've wired over $1 million to Slovenia. I never had a problem with it showing up in my Bitstamp account. But the point is that your money is in their control, and your Bitcoin is in their control while they have it. It doesn't have to be that way. There are better ways to do it, and that I'm sure that'll be coming more visible in 2014.
Right. That said, also you have to make sure that you're more comfortable doing it yourself, because like I don't want my mom to try to make an encrypted backup of her bitcoins, because I feel like the chance of Coinbase going out of business is less than my mom. You know, no offense to she's a great person, but like, she's not an encryption expert. And I know people. I have friends that are encryption experts that have accidentally gotten it too secure and not been able to get it back. Stefan lost 7,000 coins encrypting it, and he's a coder.
So, one thing that I'm kind of intrigued by is some of the times when we say, well, don't put your money in an exchange, then there's also, do you want to hold your money yourself, which is also kind of, as we hear, problematic. But there's a lot of things that can be built on this. As I understand it, one of the exchanges is a peer-to-peer exchange. So just use information to go and match buyers and sellers. And if you have say, getting fiat currency into Bitcoin or back, there is a delay because of the clawback systems, as we've been hearing about. And there are some organizations, some banks that are trying to be those buffers that basically can hold on to things to let the time go by, which I think is what you've been hearing about, this 4-day delay. But that working with a information-based exchange as opposed to an exchange that's holding the Bitcoins, I believe is how Bitcoin.de works. And I think that might be a mechanism of having more peer-to-peer and less regulated exchanges appear in the United States. And if people are interested in this, I'd like to talk with them about it.
But that doesn't solve the problem. I mean, fundamentally, you have a secret key. You have a private key that's associated with that Bitcoin. That private key has to be held by someone. It's either held by the exchange, or it's held by you, or it's held by some combination, and so forth. And so that's the magic. Peer-to-peer doesn't get around that. I mean, someone has to hold it.
It distributes it. Other questions?
It seems like a lot of the use cases for Bitcoin that you articulated involves a round trip kind of buy into Bitcoin as well as a sell, right? So if I'm transferring money, for example, I'll have to buy Bitcoin, but then whoever receives it will sell the Bitcoin, which kind of creates equal buy and sell pressures. What are some of the use cases where it just creates buy pressure, right? So other than, I just want to buy a bunch of Bitcoin because I think it's going to go up, what are some of the organic use cases where, people will buy Bitcoin and there won't be necessarily an immediate matching sell transaction on the other end?
So,
why don't we go for one person answer until we get through more?
yeah.
Whoever.
So one example is Coupa Cafe in Palo Alto. If you go and you buy something at Coupa Cafe, you're actually they don't cash it in when a lot of merchants will cash it in as soon as they get the Bitcoin. These guys won't cash it in. The reason they don't cash it in is because they realize it's going up in value.
How about is there other reasons why people are holding on to Bitcoins other than just speculation?
I mean, maybe they're planning on using them later. I mean, hands down, the biggest reason is just speculation. I mean, it's gone up 50,000x since I got in, and it won't do that again. I mean, probably it'd be great if it did, but it will go up more if it continues to stick around. It's just a fact. There's only so many of them. More people buy them, price goes up. It's pretty simple.
I think it's also participating with a community. I think there's definitely a community feel to Bitcoin right now. There's some that are just in it for the money, but there's also a lot of us that are into it because it's an interesting technology. We'd like to see it move forward. So there's things you can do with Bitcoins that you can't do with fiat currencies, and we're always exploring more and more of those. And if you have a little bit of pressure in you, like if you have some Bitcoins in your wallet and you just want to spend them, then that's a good thing, I think, for this era of the technology.
How many people here have Bitcoin? Can you raise your hand, please? Pretty good. That's fine. Yeah.
Let's try a different. Yes.
Two questions. Two questions. One of them is a currency that has the possibility of losing 60% of its value in 36 hours is not necessarily very useful for either exchange, either payments or store of value. And I'm just wondering whether you see forces in the Bitcoin world that will lead to greater stability if increasing over time, that will enable it to be more useful. And the second question is, I've just been watching for a few years, and I've noticed that unless you were deep into it, the rhetoric around Bitcoin for the past few years has been anonymous cryptocurrency, more anonymous than cash. Right? It's been appealing to the what I would call the anarcho-libertarian crowd, and all of a sudden, in the past 3 months, there's been more awareness that said, well, wait a minute, it's an authenticated ledger that lasts forever. It's actually the opposite of that. And it seems to me that it would appeal to different people for different purposes as the awareness of what it is changes. And I'm wondering whether, I'm just wondering about your comments on that, about whether you see the acceptance changing because of the marketing of Bitcoin changing along those lines.
No, for sure. I think regarding your the volatility question, it's volatile as all hell. There's no way around that. That's just how it is, and it's going to be for quite a while. I think you're going to see some derivatives markets pop up when we have things like futures. That should take care, should help to level out the volatility of it. But I don't think it's as big as a concern as most people make regarding payments. Say, for example, I have some dollars in Coinbase. I hit a button, I buy some Bitcoins, and then I send them to BitPay. BitPay, this is another business opportunity that people have built on to solve. They'll give you a 15-minute window to send the Bitcoins. So if a merchant says, hey, send Bitcoins to this address, it's $200, you need to send 0.3 Bitcoins or whatever. BitPay gives you 15 minutes to take care of that. So if you had dollars in Coinbase, you could change it into that amount of Bitcoins, and you take zero currency risk whatsoever, even if it goes up or down 30% in the next 5 minutes. So like I said, they obviously charge a fee for that. So people are going to build on it, and the volatility will continue, but how it affects you will probably decrease. Regarding the change on how it's perceived, in the early days it was just a few crypto anarcho nerds like I used to be. Still am kind of. Just discussing about how they're going to take down the Fed and this and this and this, and then it's evolved. I think people like second market getting in, an actual FINRA regulated trust, investment trust and all this has definitely changed it, and it's ridiculous. It used to be only laughed at 3 years ago. I remember when it got the first press and everybody just kind of joked about it, but it's been a complete turnaround and people are actually taking it, like everyone takes it serious now. It used to be just kind of laugh at it as an experiment, but it's definitely changed.
Way back.
Thank you. I'm interested in how currencies affect economic activity outside of the system of the currency, and there's a lot of discussion. I'm sure a lot of us are aware of the concept of demurrage. And if you have an increasingly appreciating currency, people are incentivized to hold it, and if it's a depreciating currency, it obviously incentivized to exchange, which really creates more economic activity and resiliency in the system. So to what extent are you seeing the dynamics of this potential appreciating value and accumulation preventing exchange, which is really not the point of a currency to begin with? So love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, my experience at least has been, folks, there's this kind of like feeling of wealth that happens when the price soars like this, and it actually has not inhibited people from transacting in Bitcoin. What it has done is they feel Bitcoin rich, and they use the Bitcoin to buy goods and services through Gift or Amazon or however you want to do it, or directly to a merchant. And my experience at least is that as the price skyrockets, it actually increases. Second of all, again, Bitcoin's open source, it can be built on top of, and there's already been discussions about coins being built on top that have almost like a half-life the longer they go to incentivize the velocity of money. So that's another thing that is open for discussion as well.
I absolutely agree. You would think, I initially thought the same thing. I thought, why would you spend your Bitcoin if the price is going to go up? But we've seen that compared to last year, we had the Bitcoin Black Friday recently where merchants would accept Bitcoin and they'd give a discount to customers if they paid via Bitcoin. And last year we had about, a couple hundred people or a couple hundred transactions, and this year we had over 6,000. So there are people that, just like you were saying, the wealth effect. There are people that have Bitcoin when they bought in, it was a couple dollars or $5 for a Bitcoin. Well, now they have this Bitcoin and they want to spend it. And so I know somebody who actually paid for a Tesla with Bitcoin. And if he had waited a couple months, he would have been able to buy like 9 Teslas. But the point is that, and I know that's a sad story, it's true, but people have Bitcoin and they want to spend it. And so if you can invest in Bitcoin and then turn around and buy 5 more things than you would have at that point in time, why not use that Bitcoin?
David.
So just following on from that, is Bitcoin going to make us sadder? Because either we didn't buy it and we missed out, or we spent it and we missed out. We miss out either way, and we're going to be sadder.
I think the most depressing thing in the newspaper is in the stock pages, the 52-week high and low, right? You always miss it. So yes, I think it's pretty darn depressing.
There's a solution to that, which is buy some Bitcoin now, right? You take 5% of your net worth and put it into Bitcoin. You won't be sorry, right? I mean, the thing is that
Put 10% in.
It depends on what your risk level is, but take 5%. Stuff that you don't care about, that if you lost it, that it's not going to affect your standard of living. But take a percentage, and that way you can be happy. Because anyone, with the last Bitcoin conference that I was at, they said, hey, anyone who bought Bitcoin anytime and forever made money, right? And so, I think that's true. That for the next few years, at least, anytime you buy Bitcoin and you hold on to it and you sell it, you're going to find out that you're going to make substantial amounts of money. So be happy.
Yes.
Can we talk about, can we get out of store of value and move into economic means of exchange, if we're going to call this a currency? Because what I'm hearing a lot of is if you buy it today, it's only going to go up. And I find that somewhat perplexing. Actually, I find that somewhat disturbing too. And so I'd like to talk about currency as an exchange of value, because eventually you do need to be able to use these things to buy goods and services in the real world. And I'd like to hear about how that ecosystem is going to develop, particularly given what you were saying about how the security is such that you wouldn't want your mom using it right now. So how do you actually get to the point where your mom is using it and this becomes widespread enough to not just be a means of speculation for the very, people willing to make kind of risky investments?
I mean, that's definitely already happening. Even, and it's the same on the investment side as well. People that want to see it appreciate, that aren't technical, they would go to second market. BitPay made payment processing easier. I think it's inevitable. It's already growing. I mean, how many merchants do you guys have now?
Over 14,000.
Oh wow, yeah, you were at what, 8,000 about 6 months ago?
Probably, yeah. We had about 1,000 merchants last year, and now we have over 14,000. We have about 300 to 400 companies applying every day to accept Bitcoin. And we're unlike other companies where we're not going to approve everybody. We want to know who we're working with, and we do the KYC, and we want to know. We want to make sure they're not selling drugs or guns or anything like that. So. It's definitely, the growth is there. Also, what comes to mind is our partnership with Gift. That's a way to bring it mainstream, because now you can accept, or you can spend your Bitcoin and buy gift certificates on your phone, and then walk into that store and use your gift card. So right now, people can go to Target and then go to Whole Foods and pay for that whatever you're buying via Bitcoin, but you're going through our service to get to that end result.
Right.
So it's moving mainstream. It's taking a little bit of time, but this is just the beginning of it.
And as this thing becomes more and more user friendly, right? There are two aspects. One is it has to become more user friendly, and it's got to become more secure for you to be able to have Bitcoin in your possession and control it and send it in such a way that you can't be hacked with malware. Once those two things happen, then using it as a medium of exchange then happens more naturally to a wider audience.
Right, and it's never going to be more difficult than it is today. It's only going to get easier every day.
Yeah, today it's really bad. I mean, like if someone gives me a Bitcoin address, I don't know if they're going to lose the private key for that particular address, and if I send it to them, then that money is gone forever. Disappeared. Nobody has it.
So some things that I found helpful towards getting it to just more widely disseminated is offer people fraction of a Bitcoin. Just sort of anybody that says, yeah, I'm kind of interested. It's like, okay, let's just do it. And use multi-bit on PCs. We've been using Blockchain Info's wallet on the web wallet on the iPhone, and there's a really good one on Android that's actually innate, a real client. And that's been working out pretty well, and it's been kind of fun. So usually what I do is I sort of give them 10 cents or something like that and say, okay, now let's go and donate to EFF half of it. And just so they basically see both sides of it. And they'd say, look, before you like completely give up on this, just donate it to someplace. I mean, if you just don't let it sit and go stale. But the idea of trying to get it as a transaction system so that more people know how to use it, I think right now is some of our challenge. It is getting easier. Gosh, things in the early part of this year, don't use Bitcoin-QT. Gosh, what a nasty client. I mean, it takes days for it to catch up. And that was all that was available 12 months ago. So there's been big movements on this. And I go into merchants and say, do you accept Bitcoin? You usually get that sort of blank stare that you used to get, like, do you have a web page from 20 years ago? And so this is a way of trying to get this technology to move forward. What I like about it is that PayPal was supposed to solve payments on the internet, and it didn't. It's sort of a clunky, I mean, if you wanted to peer-to-peer, yeah, there's sort of ways to do it, but it's really a headache and it's a hassle, and it doesn't work very well. This is sort of the first decentralized, born in the internet thing that I've seen that has some promise to be more like the World Wide Web than an Amazon.com of payments. David?
Yeah, just quickly, guys, we've heard a lot of very optimistic and hopeful statements. You know, you won't be sorry, you can't lose money, keeps going up, anyone who's ever bought is a winner.
So in this context, and I guess as someone who's never bought and hence is a loser, at whatever scale you want to describe that, I'm just wondering, what is the risk scenario here, right? Is it no risk? Is it just regulation? Is it just lack of regulation? What's the risk scenario and how does that play out?
Total risk. Total risk. I mean, you go to zero. Next month, tomorrow.
That's the magnitude of the risk, but not the scenario, right? What's the scenario?
Scenario, I mean, anything. It could be complete over-regulation. It could be lack of trust in the system, which is the biggest one, something innate in the underlying protocol, or just people's trust in the protocol. There's countless of them, but those are some of the bigger ones.
For sure.
Hacked.
I mean,
Yeah. Hacked. Yeah.
I think the biggest risk individually to any person is that you screw it up. And that's not, I'm sure you're all smart, competent people, but like if you store it wrong or you leave it laying around, it's just like cash. And I think on an individual level, obviously there's things that can kill Bitcoin. It could be replaced. Something better could come along. Something worse could come along that's backed by somebody bigger. Maybe Google releases a closed source competitor, and everybody goes, "Well, I already have a Google account. Now I'm done." So things like that. It could sure as hell go to zero. It could totally die. I don't tell people that this is a sure win. Plus, I hate when people say that because it makes it look like a Ponzi scheme or something. You shouldn't have sure things. Like there's something wrong with it if it's a sure thing.
Yeah, so one of the first times I actually spent Bitcoins was on Bitcoin Black Friday, and it took me to that point to realize that the process of spending them is still pretty awkward because you're copying this long address into your client, and I found myself looking like 8 times at the beginning and the end to make sure they matched and I wasn't sending my money to a random person. So just thinking about that, it makes me think of IP addresses in the early days of the internet, and I wonder, what's going to become the host names of Bitcoin wallets, or if that's something that's been talked about?
Well, I usually scan my QR code. So that's what BitPay does, is when you go to the checkout and it's time to select that you'd like to pay in Bitcoin, we generate a one-time invoice, so you can take your cell phone out and scan that QR code, so you don't even have to worry about all the numbers and letters that you could type in. And so I think, like, going back to what we've been saying this whole conversation here, it's only going to get easier. And the fact that you're typing in your Bitcoin information, that's nothing I've ever done. I've always scanned QR codes and it's been very easy. It's just like sending a text message.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about how it's very similar to HTTP or SMTP in the early days, and clients and other services are being built on top of the protocol to make it. BitPay already offers that, right? And it's not as seamless as it will ever get, but it's certainly more seamless than it was 2 years ago. And it's only if the system continues the way it is, it's only going to get better and easier to use. But it's certainly still clunky.
Yeah, but there will be better ways to do it. Trust me. 2014.
There's the payment protocol coming in 0.9, just around the corner.
Right.
So quick question, at the beginning, if I recall, you
you could create Bitcoin. You would build servers, right? And that's not how you increase the money supply. But Jared, you said it's a fixed amount now. Is that simply because it's prohibitive to build?
No,
the servers?
I should clarify that. It's a fixed cap. It caps out at 21 million, a little ways down the road. So no, there's still
It's built in that people can never build more servers than.
no, it's not. They can keep building servers. What it is there's a difficulty. It's doing a hashing function, and there's a difficulty to create the coins. As more servers and more computing power is thrown at it, it becomes more difficult. So the goal is to roughly every 10 minutes introduce coins into the money supply. It started at 50 coins roughly every 10 minutes. And then it halved. I mean, maybe it's been 9 months. Maybe it's like, I don't know. It's hard to keep track of dates in my head with Bitcoin. Everything goes so crazy. But so it's going to continue to halve, and it's going to continue to halve until it's just giving out a tiny little bit, way down the road. So at that point, the servers will still be useful because they'll. That's what sends the transactions. That's what verifies the transactions and keeps it secure. That's a whole separate thing. It's called mining. I don't generally deal with it too much. It was originally, I mined back in the day on my laptop, and I got Bitcoins and I shut it off because I was only getting 50 coins every day. And regret that. Yeah, regret that. And then it evolved to GPUs, which are considerably more powerful. Now it's with ASICs that are chips that are designed specifically for it. So, one of these chips is, 1,000 or 100,000 times more powerful than my laptop was doing, or something like that.
What's the money supply now? I'm sorry. It's about 12 million. 21 million.
They're about 12
There's about
million
half of them are
now.
done.
Okay, we got 10 minutes left. We're going to do speed questions. Yes.
Sorry, just back to the mainstream merchant proposition. How do you get more consumers to use it for, like, common consumers? So I took a look at the stats on BitPay. Most of it people were buying for KNC for gold and additional Bitcoins. How do you remove the impetus for why I would just go back to my credit card, because I don't have to pay 1% in conversion. I don't expose myself to volatility risk. I get rewards, and I get my protections. So for mainstream mob-like consumers like myself, what's the value proposition for me if I'm not really caring that much about the privacy issues?
I would wait until there's something that you do care about, which will be very soon. Like we keep repeating it, but it's it'll come along. I mean, it's anytime there's a demand like that, someone's gonna fill it.
Well, I don't like using credit cards. I'm a debit card person or cash. So the way I look at it is, I don't want to have a balance in my credit cards. And so it's you're taking your money, you're putting some into Bitcoin. As the price goes up, you're going to get more for your money. And it's just another way of doing a transaction without having to hold, dollars and hand it out to the cashier when it's time to make that purchase. So it's just another way of, everything's moving mobile. It's another way of transmitting money to somebody else. And I look at it as dollars. It's dollars for the internet. It's just another way of paying. So you can still have your credit cards, you can still have your dollars, and you can now pay in Bitcoin. And then if the price goes up, like I said, you can get more for your money. At least from my perspective, as more and more people get into Bitcoin, the price is going to go up drastically.
Short. Yes, sir.
What is the safest way to store your Bitcoin? Bitcoin QT, a online wallet. What's the safest place to store it?
Today, the safest place to store it is in what's called Bitcoin Armory, and make sure you back it up with an N of M keys. And if you back it up with a single paper copy, be very careful about where you put that paper copy. But I would use if you have a substantial amount of Bitcoin that you're trying to protect, I would use the offline method. So I bought a computer for $179 that is dedicated to one thing, and that's offline Bitcoin signing of transactions. That is the safest way today, Bitcoin Armory.
Did you buy it with Bitcoin?
Yeah.
I was wondering
that software's free.
Okay, please.
Roll, we only have a couple minutes.
What kind of effort was put in to build out secondary and tertiary financial services for business-to-business operations, like decentralized insurance and factoring, to increase trust? I wrote a paper about it, and I gave it to one of my friends at Coinbase, and it didn't seem like there was anything.
So insurance behind like a BitPay or a Coinbase, that kind of thing?
Decentralized for merchants to build trust, kind of like a decentralized FDIC.
Yeah. From our perspective, we're seeing now we're in like the venture capital phase of the development of Bitcoin, and we think that Wall Street or things like Wall Street, Wall Street gets a bad name, but things like credit default swaps and things like that come into the fray and decentralize some of that insurance risk and things like that, and that we think will be the next stage.
Early days.
Yeah, we're still early.
Let's even do another couple. Yep.
So you touched on this earlier, Jared, about use cases for Bitcoin outside of the United States. Could you guys
talk a little bit more about some of maybe the different use cases or different levels of excitement you see for Bitcoin and other things?
Yeah, for sure. It's, if you look at the growth, a few months ago nobody was really talking about China. Now I believe it's over half of the volume. I mean, there was a day, the Chinese exchange did 100 million. Also, it's really interesting. The first American venture capitalist, Jeremy Liu with Lightspeed Venture, sunk $5 million into a Chinese Bitcoin exchange because the American Bitcoin exchanges can't keep up. It's just due to regulation in banks. I think another thing is international remittance. It's $500 billion a year. It's a good sized market. It's not big compared to the currency exchange as a whole, which I think just the dollar is $4 trillion a day. But I had a developer in the UK that I paid in Bitcoin. I took the dollars, bought Bitcoins, sent them to him. He immediately changed them to pounds. We did it on a weekend, and when the entire thing was done in about 2 hours, it didn't fluctuate too much in that time. And we lost about 3%. The bank would have taken 3 to 5 days, including the weekend, charged us a $40 fee, and then ate maybe as much as 5 to 10% on the forex exchange. So use cases like that are huge. I think international payments, especially ordering from China, and those are the cases where you send a wire anyway, so it's a non-reversible method. Anyways, you're screwed if China decides to ship you the wrong goods.
Well, plus you might actually make money on the transaction. Right? You don't necessarily have to lose.
He actually did. I believe he did sit on those coins. I think it was about 4,000 I sent him, so he did all right.
Well, if you want to send me 4,000 coins. Anybody else?
Yeah. What's your address?
Do you see any signs that any Bitcoin early adopters are cashing out?
Going from 1,200 to 600. That might have been a few people cashing out. I don't know. It's really weird. Like early adopters are just. I'm surprised. I thought they would. There's a lot of people that are still holding it. I know people that were living in their mom's basement that are now worth $100 million or something like that, and they still haven't cashed out hardly any. It's shocking.
If you look at it, most people I talk to don't know about Bitcoin, and then when I tell people I made millions in Bitcoin, they still don't get into Bitcoin. And so there's still this enormous amount of cash that's going to come into Bitcoin, and until that happens, there's like no incentive for people who have Bitcoin now to sell.
Right. I mean, me personally, I really haven't cashed out that much, to be completely honest. And it's just I think it's going to keep going. It's more fun when you're holding a lot of it. And
you have happier days.
Yeah. Not last week. Last week was pretty miserable.
Yeah. No, but if, it came back within a few days. I mean, I was
Still down 30%.
I have a nuts and bolts question for Paige. So if one of your merchants, in the credit card world, say I stayed in a hotel and I gave my credit card to that hotel, and then after I checked out, they realized that I brought a horse in there and totally messed up the room, they could charge me a fine or a fee later after I patronized them. Is there any mechanism for that when you're a merchant who's accepting Bitcoin, or is it like the customer has to actively pay you for you to get money from them?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question because it is like a cash payment. So if you were to mess up the hotel room, I don't know what they would do actually. Do you guys have any thoughts on that one?
They probably have you keep a credit card on file.
In addition to it.
Yeah, if you pay cash for a hotel room, they're going to want a credit card too, most likely.
Things like rental cars and hotel rooms where they've been holding on to that credit card in reserve, they're probably going to keep using credit cards.
Right. It could also be like when you use a debit card to go to a hotel, they put a hold amount on that, and so there'd be services built on top of the Bitcoin protocol that would be like an escrow service that we were talking about earlier.
For now, there's no service like that in Bitcoin.
Not yet.
Yeah, it's essentially good. You send that to an escrow service to be held and then returned to you if there's no damage.
Right. Recurring payments is the same issue.
Go.
Hi, I'm David Blummer with Blumber Capital here in San Francisco, and our firm has been looking at this area a lot, and we've been noticing an awful lot of businesses that are very low barrier to entry folks, super commodity style that just are hard to fix. And other than you guys which are the leaders in the field, haven't seen the algorithmic kind of companies we would expect to see at this stage. A lot of copycats and so on. Do you think it's just a matter of the stage or the lack of regulation that causes it? What's your thought on that? And we're looking for it. We're open.
That causes what?
I think if there are people interested in starting Bitcoin companies, there's a fellow here that's looking to invest in them.
So what is causing it to be so many just Me Too's rather than unique? It's too early? Is that you think you're?
I think there's 100 Bitcoin companies out there no one's ever heard of that are doing different things. It's just they're not getting the press. You know, it's not, and they will. But there's all kinds of people. Like I'm a founding member of the BitAngels investment group, and like I've seen so many unique pitches and stuff. And happy to talk with you after this. Like there's a million interesting things that are coming, and it just doesn't get the press like.
Two more quick
millions.
questions. Shoot.
Coming back to the mining question.
Speak up, please.
It seems as though mining will become an increasing, depending on what the price of Bitcoin is, will become an increasingly uneconomic proposition.
No, it's always economic. So it's always, it matches supply and demand. They set it up so it always matches supply and demand. People in the mining business make money.
It just becomes more efficient, and people get pushed out because it's extremely competitive now.
Yeah, it's competitive, but you make money.
It's now a pro business. It's really not a.
Yeah, you have to.
Not a
There's
consumer
trade-off
business.
between the electricity.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's more than that because even if you got free electricity, a lot of people, you could mine on the Stanford campus, right? Because they get free electricity, but they still can't compete with the big guys. There's a lot of capital investment required to get into this. That is the main driver, is the capital investment. It's not the electricity.
Last question.
Yeah, but isn't that a problem now that we have these like large pros that they own? Like I don't know how the percentages are, but some like one or two pools together own more than 50% of all the processing power. Don't they have a lot of power deciding what kind of protocol implementations they're going to implement and which ones they're not going to implement? And isn't that a huge risk for the entire Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it's a big risk, and I hate that. I mean, we've got to find a way to distribute a little bit more.
51% of the mining power is a problem.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem, and people are definitely aware of it. There was a while back a pool actually got close to 50% just by itself, and people were freaking out.
Yeah, but it was so much the percentage. It's being able to do 6 confirmations in a row that you win, right? Because even if you have 51%,
Right.
if you're not winning 6 in a row, you don't essentially win.
Well, you could also decide to implement a protocol that issues them more coins. And say
No.
I'm getting the final signal. Thank you very much to a wonderful panel. Thank you very much for coming.